Hello friends, welcome back to Cosmopolitan Cornbread. So we just had a humongous rainstorm come through here and the temperature dropped probably 20 degrees, temporarily of course, but I thought this is the perfect time to come down here and do a garden tour because I'm not going to melt in the process. Before I even walk into the garden, I get a lot of questions as to how I keep raccoons and other varmints out of the garden when I use things like fish emulsion as fertilizer, because raccoons will smell that and they'll be all up in here destroying the garden. Well, the fence that I have around here is electric. It is poultry fencing from Premier One. Because we let our chickens free roam now, I don't really need it, and so I utilized it because we haven't yet built the permanent fence that'll go around here. We plan on doing a double fence, the 2 rows 6 feet apart, that will help keep deer out. It's an old-fashioned method for fencing in your gardens. I know Living Traditions Homestead actually started doing that and it has worked for them. And so that is what we plan on doing at some point, but for the time being, this has been working and we have not had anything get in here. Now, even after we do put in the traditional metal fencing with the gate and all that stuff, we'll still have a hot wire around the top. That's what we did in Alabama. And it kept everything out because cats, raccoons, everything loves garden beds. So things are, for the most part, looking a lot better. My NT half-runner green beans over here are greening up. Pretty much everything is looking better, I think, than it did in the last garden tour that I filmed, with a couple of exceptions. Now, initially I had been using fish emulsion, but it just is not enough. And so now I'm alternating between 2 different water-soluble fertilizers, and I saw immediate results. For instance, these 4 pepper plants right here, I was certain were going to die. And yet they've greened up and I see my first little Tabasco pepper. So that is a good sign. I'm pretty happy with those results for sure. And all of the rest of the pepper plants in the bed so far are also looking better. Now when my seedlings get bigger that I potted up the other day, they will go and fill in the rest of the bed here. And that's why I haven't planted anything else in here. The cucumber trellis over here is still producing lots of cucumbers. Now the plants didn't get humongous. They've only gone up a few feet on the trellis, but we've been getting lots of cucumbers off of these. My Mongolian giant sunflower here, you can see, is bent over from the storm we just had. I need to come out here and tie this to the trellis because Mongolian giants get humongous. The ones I grew in Alabama got 10, 11 feet tall, but they do need a little bit of support, and so that is why I planted it right next to this trellis so that it can be reinforced. So in this bed over here, most everything is looking better. Even these 2 tomato plants right here that I thought were gonders are starting to turn green and look better. So I'm hopeful with that. I see some little tomatoes growing there. This plant here is still struggling a little bit, and so I need to trim off the yellow bits, go ahead and tie that to the trellis, and hopefully it can improve. Oh, I see another one that apparently I forgot to tie up to the trellis, so I need to come out here with my twine. The asparagus bed and all of its buddies is looking amazing. I have done several harvests of the basil already, and yet you can see it's growing like crazy. Both the Genovese basil, the purple basil, and then that is the cardinal basil down there. Now, I've never grown that one before. I actually grew it for the beautiful purple magenta kind of flowers that it creates at the top, but I have been harvesting some of that as well. I don't know how it is about flavor yet. I haven't tried it. I do have some drying though in my herb rack. The thyme down here is getting pretty thick, so I think I'm going to begin harvesting some of this, as well as some of the sage that we have out here. There's a bunch of that doing really well. The zucchini, I'm beginning to see some yellowing along the edges of some of the leaves, which is the same thing that happened with my yellow squash. I see something here I need to get. Look at that beauty. That is a gorgeous zucchini. I mean, generally, the zucchini plants look beautiful, but then one by one, I'm seeing this yellowing happening around the edges of the leaves, like this one in particular. Now, my yellow squash bed over here is looking horrible. Initially, I started seeing signs of deficiencies like calcium, magnesium, because I was seeing blossom end rot with the squash. And so I began fertilizing it with a CalMag fertilizer, water soluble, so that the nutrients were readily available for the plants. And all of the newer leaves it was growing was nice and green. So that made me very, very hopeful that I had remedied the situation. However, this big storm that we just had come through, I noticed has snapped some of the stalks. So that is very sad to see. So I would say this whole section right here is going to die, but there's another stalk coming off from the bottom down there, and it looks like it's in good shape. So hopefully these beautiful new growth leaves will continue to look as healthy as they are. I do see another little squash growing down there, and if we don't get any blossom end rot, then I'll know that what I did helped these plants out. Oh, there we've got another pretty little squash coming along. And you can also see that I put my shade cloth back up there. Now originally I had this piece of cattle panel going over the squash, but it was too low to the ground, and so I went ahead and removed it, but then I never put it back up. And of course it's been extremely hot, and so I went ahead and I put it back up as kind of a walled shade on the western side, just like I have all of my other beds, and it has really helped out. All right, this bed down here, I see more tomato plants that I need to come and attach to the trellis. This is why I use cattle panels in my garden beds, because they're super sturdy, and I can just take these plants all the way up it, and I can still have access to the entire plant. I don't have to worry about there not being enough airflow, not being able to reach in there, unlike with a tomato cage. The Kajari melons are also greening up. I mean, generally everything is looking a lot better than it was prior to me fertilizing. So I think that, you know, even though the soil was organic and all of that, either the nutrients were not readily available or it just wasn't very nutritious soil. Word to the wise, organic, the word organic, doesn't always mean nutritious. It just means it doesn't have chemical junk in it, or shouldn't anyways. And that rule of not necessarily being nutritious applies to both garden soil and food. After all, you can buy organic sugar and everything else. All right, my watermelon down here is looking pretty nice. We've got some vines beginning to sprawl out across the ground, and just about every plant has little baby watermelons on them. So that is encouraging, and I hope it continues to move in that direction. These watermelons over here were not really doing much of anything either, but all of a sudden I'm starting to see them taking off. And once again, I attribute this to the better fertilizer. Everything was just kind of really slow going until I fed the plants, and now everything's starting to look a little bit happier. These short stuff sunflowers look like they're getting ready to create their flowers. I can't wait to see those. Now, I mentioned in a previous video how these were supposed to be pole beans, and I felt like the package was not labeled properly. And I had someone else say that their pole beans weren't very polling either. I do need to come out though and pick, because I have not picked beans in about 2 days, and so we've got a lot of pickable beans that need to get taken up to the house. I do have some pest pressure happening over here. Not really sure what is eating them. I haven't laid eyes on the culprit, but I think I do need to come out here and maybe treat this evening with an organic pest control, maybe some DE or something like that. The plants were looking really good, and all of a sudden they're starting to show this on the new growth. So we've got something going on here, and I need to take care of this before it spreads to my other plants. Now, this bed down here is one that has really, really struggled. It seems like it struggles more than any other bed. But again, even this bed, after I fertilized it, is starting to show improvement. All of the plants are getting a little bit greener. All of a sudden they're showing some more growth, when there for a while they seemed really, really stunted. So I think once the end of the season comes, this is one of the beds that I'm going to really need to focus on composting and getting this soil up to snuff. Now, this is the first plant that is really starting to produce some tomatoes. These are called chocolate sprinkle tomatoes, and they're just a little cherry type of tomato. I planted these for Mr. Smith because he loves to snack on raw tomatoes. And then this bed over here is another one that is looking really good. I've got 2 beds in particular that are just really doing very well as far as the tomatoes go. This bed and that first one that I showed you over there with the tomatoes that has like the fennel and all of that. Both of these beds are doing pretty well. The plants are really starting to take off. Now, back in there, I have those splash of cream tomatoes, and I just wasn't too sure about those. I honestly didn't think any of them would make it, but now it looks like they too are beginning to show a little motivation, and so I don't know, maybe we'll get something out of those. All right, and then the last thing that I wanted to show you was down here on the ground, right along the fence line. I planted a whole bunch of comfrey. Now, comfrey comes in different varieties, and if you decide to grow comfrey, you do want to be very careful about what kind that you plant. This here is called Bocking 14, and it's actually a sterile comfrey. And I know a sterile plant sounds really odd as something that you would want to plant in your garden, but comfrey can become incredibly invasive. And if you plant true comfrey that creates seeds, that comfrey has a very good chance of going absolutely everywhere and becoming a problem. But Bocking 14 and another variety, I think it's called Bocking 7, is sterile, and so you can only propagate it through root cuttings, but it is very easy to propagate that way. And so once these plants get established, I could take one of these plants, dig it up, and take the root, cut it into a bunch of little pieces, and each one of those root cuttings would give me another big, beautiful comfrey plant. So I planted a whole bunch of them over here. Hi, Ruby. Hi, Stinker. I planted that row of comfrey down there, and then I also planted some more down here at the end of this bed. Just a few plants right down there. You can see right here. And we've got all of these weeds starting to creep in over here. I'm going to have to bring my weed torch out here and handle these. And then I also planted a couple down here. However, something is munching on them. There's only one leaf left on this one. The leaves are gone there, and the leaves are gone there. So we've got something that's getting a snack. And speaking of snacks, so the eggplant and the roselle plants are the first thing that I really saw a pest on, and it was flea beetles, which are these tiny little black beetles, and they get their name because they look just like fleas. And I sprayed with some organic safe insecticidal soap type of spray. And it took care of most of the issue. However, I am still seeing some here and there. Let's see if I can zoom in and show you one. If you look very closely, you can see some tiny little black specks right there. That's those flea beetles. Well, hi, you Ute. What you doing, buddy? Going for a walk with Dad? So it's pretty easy to spot the damage from flea beetles. It's all these little speckles, little bitty bites all over the place. And there you can see some of the culprits right there. But despite the flea beetles, I do have some eggplants growing. You can see one right down here. There's one right there, right here, and I've got another one right there. So there's an eggplant on every one of the 4 plants so far. So I'm hoping I get some good eggplants and I'll be able to make my eggplant lasagna. All right, so when we first moved here last year, and actually while we were still in the process of moving, I installed these 2 round raised beds. They're just rings that I got from Tractor Supply. And in this one, we've got some cucumbers planted, and we are getting some cucumbers off of them, but not a ton. And I really think it's because there's not enough light up here, because we're up by the house and there's a lot of shade. This one right here I had completely planted with onions, and they seemed to be doing great at first, and then they all just kind of died. I've still got to clean out this bed. I think next year I'll plant maybe some squash up here, something that can handle having more shade, and might actually appreciate that. But because it's not in the regular garden and the chickens do roam free, I had to put some fencing around these rings, otherwise they would just get in there and eat everything. Hi, Nubsy. This is his favorite spot to sleep. Every day he's out here. Right here we have a stone bed that was here when we moved in. All of this stonework was here when we moved in. And I've planted some blueberries. And again, the ones that I planted, they're just kind of struggling. I don't know that it's a really good place for the blueberries. And so I bought a few more, as you can see. These are going to get planted down in the main garden. That way they've got more sunlight and it's going to be a different environment. I also have a couple aronia berries back there. They're actually in a spot where there were blueberries, but the chickens kind of destroyed them because I hadn't yet fenced this in. It's not pretty, but it does the job, keeps the chickens out. But the new ones here, you can see new growth taking place. So even though there's not a lot of light, these plants seem to be kind of happy in this spot. But again, I'm going to plant them down in the main garden and, you know, just build another stone bed like I did for the eggplant, for the rhubarb, and things like that. All right, and then this is my fenced in long stone bed. And I pretty much planted this entire thing with all different kinds of herbs. It does get direct sunlight in the late afternoon for a short period of time. So not everything is doing fantastic, but most of it's doing pretty good. We've got Tulsi basil, we've got some more of that cardinal basil. We've got the variegated oregano down there. This is the pineapple sage. This is just a flowering sage. It gives those beautiful red flowers in the very end of summer. I've got the golden sage down there, some purple basil. This is that spicy oregano, which I had some people ask me about that, like what variety it is. And I don't know. They were some starts that I picked up at the store and it was labeled spicy oregano. But my son tried them out this week and he said it doesn't taste any different than the other oregano. So, not really spicy. This Italian basil here is looking great. The sage down there, not doing so good. So this is kind of one of the things I think that is really struggling, not getting enough light. The thyme down there is doing very well. And so is this oregano that I planted last year. Then that down there is a creeping rosemary plant. I didn't even know there was such a thing until I saw a start this year. And then over here we've got some bee balm that is in full flower. The bee balm that was out in the main garden has already reached its end of the season, and it was more of a magenta color, whereas this is more of a purple color. This is actually one that I brought with me from Alabama. I dug up some of that and brought it along. And then we've got some purple coneflower, echinacea, growing back there in the corner. There's actually all sorts of flowers coming up here in the back along the stone wall. They grow up very tall, taller than normal. Again, just because they're reaching for the light in this shaded area. We got some chamomile and lots of zinnias and cosmos. Now up here I've got a whole nother pot of comfrey. Again, these came from root cuttings. You can see I've got all sorts of them in here. These will also get planted down in the garden area. I just haven't planted them all yet. And then these are my other pepper seedlings that I repotted, all different varieties. And we just got that rain, so I need to pull these out of the standing water. These are all jalapeno peppers. We've got Chinese 5-color, Guatemaladas, lipstick peppers, jigsaw peppers, some cayenne, some Brazilian starfish, and somewhere in there is one lone bell pepper. Now over here in this green stalk, just this past week, we went ahead and planted a bunch of lettuce of all different varieties because since this is such a shaded area, kind of felt like this would be a good spot to try and grow some. And you can see that a lot of them have started. We've got some Merlot, we got some Tom Thumb down there. This up here is Butter Crunch. So we kind of heavily seeded, and we'll have to do some thinning out here pretty soon, but hopefully, again, this will be a good spot for the lettuce to grow. Now this terracotta pot is actually one that the previous owners left behind, and it's got a crack in it, but it was such a cool pot, I couldn't resist planting something in it. And so I've got some of that creeping rosemary right there. I've got some zinnias, a couple different varieties, and then I've got some cosmos up here that are kind of in between the flowers right now. I need to deadhead all of these. I think these were Rubenza cosmos, if I remember correctly. And then this little pot down here is moringa. So my understanding is this is actually a type of tree. And so I will need to eventually repot this, and I will need to keep this protected during the winter time because it will die over winter. But hopefully we can get this to take off and maybe harvest some moringa in the future. It is a great nutritional aid, superfood, has all sorts of benefits that you can read up on. And so I thought it would be nice to grow some of that. I had never seen it offered in a nursery before, and the nursery that I like to go to in Fort Smith, Sharam's, has all sorts of things that I have never seen anywhere else, including patchouli. I do actually like the fragrance of patchouli as long as it's mild. If it's overwhelming, if it's really strong, it's too much, but I do like it when it's subtle. All right, so that is the garden tour. Now, I do get a lot of questions about garden zones. Now, I know that the powers that be redid a lot of the garden zones recently, and so a lot of people are in different zones than they were a couple of years ago. If you put in my zip code, it says I'm one thing. However, if you zoom in on the map, that actually shows the different colors for the different zones. Here in the mountains, those zones are going to vary quite a bit. Even though your zip code may say one thing, it's good to actually look at the map and see where your house is and get the more refined information for exactly where you live. And so this area where I'm at right now is Garden Zone 7B. It's the exact same zone that I was in Alabama, but I just want to remind everyone, especially if you're a new gardener, the garden zone has nothing to do with how things do in the summertime, because you can have Garden Zone 7B down in Alabama or here in Arkansas, and it gets really hot in the summer. But you can also have Garden Zone 7B up in Washington State, and those summers are going to look incredibly different. The garden zone that you're in simply indicates your winters. What is your typical low for the winter, and therefore what can typically survive your winter as a perennial. So the garden zone really has nothing to do with your spring or summer garden or anything like that, because even your first and last frost dates are going to vary drastically. But you also need to get familiar with where you live and where you garden, because in Alabama, even though we had a specific frost date for where we lived, because of the woods and water that surrounded us, we were always a little bit cooler at night, and so we would always get frosts quicker than what the calendars and all of the experts said we would. So as you garden and as you live where you are, you get to know your climate better, and that just helps you out when you're planning your gardening. So that is it for today, you guys. Thanks for spending some time with me here in the garden and everything else, and I'll talk to y'all next time.